Recording now, this is lesson 5.8, finding the percent of a number, part 2. So before watching the recording, please make sure that you have this 5.8 worksheet in front of you and that you've watched part 1 of this video that went over the benchmark percents as well as the estimate calculation. And in part 1, 10% of a number and 50% of a number were reviewed with you. Just note that the purpose of this video is to find the deeper meaning and connection between percent of a number and what it means in terms of the fraction it represents, so that you have an understanding of working through some of these shortcuts. Because again, that'll help you get the deeper meaning behind percent of a number. Now, if you still don't understand quite how to figure out these shortcuts, you can always turn the percent into a decimal and multiply it by the whole number. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue with the other side of the worksheet here, the chart at the back. So continuing from 10%, let's move to 5% of a number. So let's look at 5% of a number. Okay, so we go to 5% of a number because we can relate it back to 10% of a number. So in terms of the shortcut, we can think of 5% where 5%, how is it related to 10%? Well, 5% is half of 10%. So what we could do is we could find 10% of the number, then divide that answer by 2, since again, 5 is half of 10. So if we look at this example here, where we're finding 5% of 500. So 5% of 500. So it's going to be a very small amount. So what you're going to do first is you're going to find 10% of 500, which again, if you remember in the previous example about 10%, all you're doing is you're moving the decimal point one spot to the left because you're taking a tenth of that number. So again, imagine that the decimal point is always right there at the end of any whole number, and you move it to the left by one spot because that's taking 1/10 of it or dividing it by 10. So if 10% of 500 is 50. Because again, you're moving it one spot to the left. Now, if 10% of 500 is 50, then you can find 5%. So then if you take, therefore, 5% of 500 is 50, which is 10%, divided by 2, which will give you 25. Again, we do that because going back to this statement we have here, we find 10% of the number, 10% of the number was 50, and then we divided that answer by 2 because again, 5 is half of 10, okay? And again, if you don't understand any of this, then simply what you need to do is you take the decimal of 5%, which is 500ths, and then you can multiply that by 500. And you will get the same answer. But again, choose what works for you. Think about these shortcuts as ways to help you really understand the meaning of percent of a number. Now, let's do 20% next because that's the next progression from 10%, 5%, 20%. So let's look at 20% of a number. Think about first, how is it related back to 10%? Because again, we can utilize that shortcut. Well, if you think about it, 20 is double 10, or 10 times 2 equals 20. So in that case, what is the connection with 10%? Again, what you can do is you can find 10% of the number. Then instead of dividing it, you're going to multiply that answer by 2. You're thinking about what is the connection between 20 and 10. In this case, you multiply the answer by 2 because 10 times 2 is 20. So if we apply it to the example here, we're going to look at 20%, finding 20% of 92. Okay, so we follow a similar step as above. We're going to find 20% of 92. And again, I'll repeat this again. All you're doing when you're finding find 10%. Find 10% of 92. So again, all that requires is you know the decimal point is there at the end of every whole number, and you're going to move it 1 spot to the left because that will give you 10% or 1/10 of the number. So 10% of 92 is 9.2. Okay. Therefore, 20% of 92 will be, I'm running out of room here. You're going to take 9.2 and multiply it by 2, which equals, so that'll be 4, and 9 times 2, that'll be 18.4. Okay, so again, that's how you find 20%. You find 10% of the number, which is 92, and then you multiply it, find 10% of the number, which is 9.2, because we moved the decimal point to the left by 1, and then you multiply that answer times 2, because 20 is 10 times 2. So you think about the relationship between 10 and 20%. Okay, now the last two that we'll deal with is 25% and 75%. Think about our benchmark percents now. What does 25% of a number mean? Okay, think to yourself, what does it mean? Well, if you relate it back to our benchmark percents here, we see that 25% is equivalent to 1/4, okay? So 25% of a number means you're taking 1/4 of the number. And that means that you can divide the whole or divide the number by 4, and you will get 25% of the number. Okay, so this sometimes will require long division, and this is where you have to think to yourself, what am I more efficient with? Am I more efficient with converting 25% to the decimal, or am I more efficient with dividing something by 4? Now, if a number is divisible by 4, then go for the long division or go for the division. If it's not divisible by 4, then you have to do a bit of work. So let's try both ways. Okay, so let's go find 25% of 30. So if you find 25% of 30, remember that 25% means 1/4 of 30. So you're going to take 30 and you're going to divide it by 4. So I'm going to do the long division here. And I know I probably have to add, a 0 to my dividend. Okay, so I know 7 times 4 is 28. To bring down the 0, 20 divided by 4 is 5, times 4 is 20. Okay, so I know that 25% of 30 is 7.5, okay? Now, if I did it the other way and I took 25% of 30, and again, you can do this with any percent, think to yourself, what is 25% as a decimal? Well, you're going to be doing 25 hundredths times 30. Now, I kind of know that my answer is already going to be 7.5 because I did the long division. So ideally, you're estimating this in your head, but I'm going to use my other answer of 7.5. I know that's what my answer is going to be. Then I'm going to do 25 times 30 here. 0, 0, 0, 15, 1, 7. And I know based on my previous answer, 25% of 30 will be 7.5. So therefore, 25% of 30, 1/4 of 30 is 7.5. Okay, so that's 25%. Now let's jump to 75%. Again, and this is where similarly to 25%, you might find it easier to convert 75% to a decimal, which again, you can do for any percent. So you always want to think, how can I relate this to my benchmark percents? And what is the deeper meaning behind it? Okay, well, 75% of a number, going back to our benchmark percents, we know that it's 3/4. We know it's 3/4 of the number. Can we make this easier on ourselves in terms of shortcuts? Well, there's a number of ways you can think of it. What you could do is okay, so I'm just going to divide this in half here because I'm running out of space. What you could do is you could take, when you're taking 75% of 95, you could divide the number by 4, then subtract it from the number. Another thing that you could do is you could divide the number by 4 and then multiply it by 3, because then you're taking 3/4 of the number. The other way to do it is to simply just convert to a decimal and multiply. So in either case, this one will just give you one calculation. This one gives you 2 calculations, but again, it promotes the deeper meaning behind percent. So let's do this one first. 75% of 95. So I'm first going to take 1/4 of it. So I'm going to go 95 divided by 4. I know my estimate in my head, 100 divided by 4 is 25. So I'm looking for a number lower than 25. So I'm going to go 2 times 4 is 8. I'm going to add this already. So this is going to be 3 times 4 is 12. 30 divided by 4 is going to be 7 times 4 is 28. 20 divided by 4 is 5. 5 times 4 is 20 and 0. Okay, so I know that 1/4 of 95 or 25% of 95 is 23.75. So then I can take 95 and then I'm going to subtract 1/4 of it, which is 23.75. Again, you're seeing that this might require more work than needed because it's another calculation. So this is where converting it to 9 minus 2 is 7. Converting it to a decimal might be faster. 71.25 is 75% of 95. So if we do it the other way, we go 0.75 times 95. Okay, so again, you're converting it to a decimal. I can kind of use this answer to help me, that I know I'm going to get that answer. So you can go 75 times 95, 25 and 2, 7 times 5, 35 plus 2 is 37, 0, 5 times 9 is 45, 4, 7 times 9 is 63, plus 4, 67, 5, 2, 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 7 is 11, and I know that that's my answer. Oh, therefore, 75% of 95 is 71 and 25 hundredths. Okay, so that's a lesson for you on finding the percent of a number. So I'm going to repeat again. Try to utilize these shortcuts because it helps you look at the deeper meaning behind percent of a number and its relation to the fraction and lowest terms. And if you still don't understand these connections with these shortcuts, then you may just again convert the percent to the equivalent decimal and multiply it by the whole.